Some of you have come in and failed to sign in. We would appreciate it if you would do that. We take roll.
That way we know when they speak who they are, right?
But no, Bob, come here. Is Nathan Kaitner here? Okay, so just on the phone. Yeah, so, okay. Welcome, glad to have you here with us. We'll begin our meeting by asking for a motion to approve the minutes that were provided from the May 2nd meeting.
I read the minutes and I move approval of the minutes as posted.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes as provided from the May 2nd meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Brett Robinson.
Manager, what are we going to do, manager's report?
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me a few minutes. I guess I'll just speak loudly. Does everybody have a map or a map of kind of?
Thank you. Chair, before he starts, I want to make sure that everybody on the board knows my airplane is in one of these.
You're disclosing.
Just disclosing, letting you know that my airplane sits in one of these that we'll discuss. So
So you might recuse, if there was a vote, you would recuse yourself.
potentially that way, so.
Thank you.
So the map that you have is of the T hangars at the airport. We built these in 2001 and 2. They're completed, I think, in 2002. So we've owned this for 22 years. But the concept that I would be asking the airport authority for is to condominiumize these units. The hope would be to give my tenants an opportunity to purchase the units. That would be ideal if they would purchase those, and I would provide a possibly owner financing situation, so I don't have to take the hit immediately on my taxes. But anyway, that would be the hope. Is just, and the concept that there's 12 units, there's 10 full-size units, 2 end units. The hope would be to condominiumize those 10 to 12 units and create parcels so that they could have individual ownership of those units. So I just open it up to questions for you. I'm sure you have many.
Are they all attached?
Yes.
Are there special requirements with condominiumizing anything that require additional fire separation and things like that between units?
So it went through, 22 years ago, it went through the fire and met those at that time. I don't know what Logan City will require on that, if anything. I mean, they're separated, partitioned separately.
I know, but they don't have fire separation, do they?
There, I don't know what the definition of that is exactly, so that's a good question.
It's related to one of the questions I would have about land use authority, whether or not the land use authority would need to approve these, which would be Logan City. I think normally that type of action would at least require a review of the land use authority. And I would at least like to have that discussion with them before we move forward with anything.
What requirements does the airport authority have in terms of insurance and, liability insurance, fire insurance on, individual hangars? Is that
I think that would be a
is it required?
operator from whoever's leasing or owning that hangar. I think if you have your hangar, you'll maintain your own insurance. I maintain mine on a plane.
Is that a requirement of leasing a hangar? I mean, again, it's wise, but if,
Yeah, I think
especially liability, it's like auto, what if you get hit by a driver that has no insurance? What if a fire starts in another hangar and that person doesn't have liability insurance?
keep in mind, these are metal buildings, metal steel buildings that the
Which
fire
is metal.
potential is, somewhat limited because of the fuel ability. There's not wood, it's not a wood frame, it's a metal.
There's also a lot of valuable aircraft.
Absolutely, right.
Well, I mean, they've been, how long have they been here, did you say, Brett?
22 years.
2 years.
Yep.
They've been leased out to people who have had their hangars parked in there for 22 years. And so, I assume all of these issues have been addressed over the last.
I'm sure the fire department would continue to require there's fire extinguishers in each of the units. I mean, there is that risk, I would say, but I think it's minimal. We have an annual,
You would carry the liability and the fire insurance for the entire building.
yes.
Well, I agree with David that I think that this is a change of use or a change of, a change of, not use, but it's not separate hangars anymore. It's a collective and you want to sell them off one at a time. I do think it probably needs to go back through planning commission so that they have an opportunity to weigh in and you make sure with community development that you have complied with all of the current regulations with respect to I don't know what regulations there are specifically on hangars, but I do think that is an appropriate step.
I mean, I can talk to Logan City's land use attorney and report back next month to the group or report to John by email and then.
Just take it through community development.
I'd be curious if, from our end, if we're willing to engage it or not. I mean, plus or minus, if it seems like maybe a chicken and the egg kind
Just
of item that
philosophy.
if we're willing, then we maybe set a condition on that. If we're not willing, then may not send them through that. If we're willing, then saying as a condition of that willingness that he has to get approval there or not. And I don't mean to plus or minus the rest of the board on whether they're willing or not, but that may be a domino to start a domino. If it's a no, we probably ought to tell them no and not waste the time going there. I think this is different. I don't know that we have any that are condominiumized to this point.
I mean, it also means 12 contracts for the airport authority instead of one.
That's
so
true.
It's certainly more work for the airport authority.
So I've got Alan here who is an attorney who is helping me with the condominiumizing, the legal aspect. So I think he could maybe answer some of these questions if you have any.
Hi, Alan Collins. I apologize, I'm an attorney, but somebody has to be, I guess. I specialize in HOA law. This would be a commercial owners association. Conceptually, this is almost identical to what it already is. The distinction is right now, Brett's company owns the building, and it's partitioned into several T hangars, and they're leased out to individual owners. If this concept were to be considered, basically what you're talking about now is rather than Brett's company owning the entire building that's partitioned into individual units, it would be the Commercial Owners Association, which would be a nonprofit corporation, which would own the building, and it would be divided into the same units. The question of the land underneath, there are options there. The land underneath could remain a single parcel just like it is today. And that single parcel with the leaseholder would be the association versus Brett's company. Just one company to a different company.
Could have, to her point, it could have one
parcel.
lease agreement.
Exactly. Alternatively, each T-hanger could have its own, the ground underneath could be parcelized, if you will, and then there could be a separate ground lease agreement for each individual unit. And that's a discussion that we'd have later on with the authority, assuming that this whole concept was of interest, that we could move forward with it. A lot of these questions about fire requirements and other things like that, those are absolutely things that we have to dig into. But before we take all that effort, we want to find out if this concept is accessible or acceptable to the authority.
Well, and one of the things we're dealing with in the consultant's report is our leases and perhaps making some changes to that. So, I mean, I hate to put you off, but I'm not sure we're in a position to really even make that decision right now until we get a little further into analyzing this consultant's report. I mean.
Well, and that's something we'd want to actually do ourselves anyway, because there are some minor differences that impact having an owners association, and we'd want to be involved. We'd have to negotiate a new lease anyway, because the current lease is unassignable. And so no matter what, we'd be looking at a new lease, whether it's several or one, and that's something we'd want to be involved with anyway. And I would assume that you guys, as you work with your consultant on what a lease should say, you'd be interested in what parties, whether it's an individual owner or whether it's an association owner, you'd be interested in what they're thinking anyway. So that's a perfect way to work together.
This is not a unique concept. These types of developments take place on most of the major airports in the state. And because it's a more efficient use of the limited land, it meets, it provides a means of utilizing that dead space between, or minimizing the dead space between hangars, but at the expense of increased fire prevention requirements. And so Jeannie's comment about needing to run it through the Planning Commission is key. And with regard to insurance, typically, Alan, for this, the structure typically would be insured by your association, by the commercial, and then the individual tenants, owners would be responsible for the stuff that's inside.
Exactly, and that's really no different than the way it works since 2002. The current ground lease agreement requires a certain minimal coverage. That would apply whether or not it's this company or whether it's a nonprofit corporation. It wouldn't be any different, pending any changes that might come out in a new contract. And the individual unit owners would insure their own space and property just like they do today. It would really be no change from the perspective of the authority in that sense, other than you'd have a corporation with a professional manager behind it that was overseeing the whole thing. Right now, all you have is Brett.
I don't know that that's a given.
It would be in the CC&Rs. Yeah, it would be a given.
Okay.
It would be a requirement under the CC&Rs to have a professional management company operate the thing.
Okay.
And Brett, I don't think he's ever been a professional management company, so
I don't want to manage.
that would be a step up.
That's one of the reasons I want to sell it.
Alan, first of all, I want to accept your apology for being an attorney. Thank you. Accepted, duly noted in the record. Brett, what is the benefit to the airport to condominium? I get your benefit. What's the benefit to the airport authority?
Well, I think the users, the benefit is they could, instead of being a renter, they can be an owner of a parcel and take ownership of that and take care. I think the way that we're planning to set up the condominiumize, or the condominiumize the units, the association would be to ensure that the building is maintained properly. It's 22 years old, and it's, we want to make sure that that stays that way, stays well maintained. So, and that there's funds in there to keep it painted, keep it, keep all those things, moving forward and in nice condition. But I think is it a benefit to the airport authority? I think in that way, it would be a benefit that it's maintained well, and that it's not just a rental unit, but it's individual units that own and take ownership in it. So
I have a couple of questions. One, what happens to 1 and 12? Airplanes can't fit in those. What happens to spaces like that?
that's,
Go ahead.
I don't know yet, because I haven't approached very many tenants. My hope would be that we would do 10 units and not 12, and kind of open up those spaces so that those other larger units could become even larger, so that end unit could be combined. That would be ideal for me, rather than sell those off as smaller units. In reality, we have had in the past, we've had airplanes in there. Some are foldable wings. We even had a tiny little airplane that actually did fit in there. So there is limited demand for those end units.
My next question is, do you have a plane? Are you in the aviation, or do you have a plane
I'm not.
pilot?
I'm not.
So you're only a tenant and not, or you're only a landlord and not a
User.
not a user?
Yep.
If I could respond to Brian's question earlier, Brian asked if we'd be able to, or if we'd be willing to consider this if it's allowed under the land use authority. I would say, I don't see any reason why not. But with that being said, I would like to ask our manager if he would reach out to some other airports before we meet next time, and just see if there are any other issues we should be considering in looking at this proposal.
And if we change the structure of our leases at the airport, which is something the consultant has recommended we take a look at, again, does that affect their business plan or their business model? I mean, do we sort of need to also decide where we're headed with updating our potential leases going forward, and make sure, that still works for your business model too, if it were approved?
One nice thing about the change of leases is the extent of, if you're going to the middle of property on hangars, that would be one thing that is potential out there, but this one has 0 lot line differences between the hangars, so that piece of his proposal isn't within this one, because they're already 0 lot line leases. So,
Brett, is this layout the current layout?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned maybe going from 12 to 10. Would you
Yes.
remove some walls?
So I think just incorporating those two little, as I understood it, those two.
Yeah, there's just it's a fairly light gauge steel wall that could easily be taken out.
Just remove those small walls on the
Yes.
end.
Yeah.
So I still believe that 22 years ago, you built this structure. There have been a lot of changes in terms of regulations and all that it would be appropriate for you to go through planning commission. I don't feel comfortable saying, sure, we think this is a great idea, and then planning commission gives you, 10 different things you have to do, and you decide, oh, it's not worth it for me to do all that stuff, or whatever, or I'm gonna put that onto the owners. And so I don't know, I don't quite agree with the chicken and the egg, because I think that when you bring a project to the authority, I think you need to have crossed your T's and dotted your I's in terms of local land use authority first. So that's my opinion.
Again, I think we also need to make some decisions on lease and, you know, any changes we're going to make there.
Are there further questions?
I guess my question is, it sounds like before you would approve a concept plan to move forward, you want me to go before the Logan City Planning Commission and get their recommendations?
Well, I think you could have just a consult with staff to see, you know, they'll
If there
often
would
do
be-
pre-construction meetings just to see what issues you might be facing or addressing. And I'd be happy to help facilitate that if you'd like to do that. Again, I think,
Or there may be none.
yeah.
You know, there may be none.
right. You know, we just don't know. But again, I think we also need to dive in a little deeper into if and how we choose to change our lease structure and leases versus ownership and those sorts of things. So, I mean, are you in a tremendous hurry to get this
No.
done?
No.
Okay, because I don't think any of us are saying no, you know, definitely writing it off, but I think we're saying for your business plan and for our discussions about airport leases, we just need to get a little further along so you have accurate information. And again, if you'll give me contact information,
Sure, I can email you. Yeah, okay.
that'd be great.
Yeah, if you can set that up, and then I'll just email you, and if you can set that up, we'll just,
Information.
yeah, okay. Any other questions for you, for me? I mean, yeah.
Thanks. Good luck. Is Mr. Kapner here?
Yes.
Please come forward, introduce yourself, and
Just go here.
yes.
I was on a school board once. It wasn't as elaborate as this, so I'm almost familiar with this formal setting. My name is Nathan Kapner. I am a technician and coordinator, which in the private sector would be more like an assistant manager with the FAA in the Northern Utah shop. Our office is in Salt Lake City, sorry. But we service Logan Airport. So I have come to talk about the Melzer. Does anybody need that help understanding acronyms?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm not sure what
Or what it is. So please let me know if you need further clarification on anything I say, because I live in the tech world. So Melzer is at the end of the runway, and it's those big lights. You got a set of incandescent lights, and you got a string of right at the front there as a plane comes in.
I think the guy's playing
The strobe lights that line the pilot can put his nose to it, he knows he's going to be on the middle of the runway. And then distance, and then the rest of the lights help him with distance to the runway. And so this is obviously not normal, right, for a technician to show up at a venue like this. But I felt it was pretty necessary because I came from Idaho recently to this shop. Same work, different shop. I've been working on the Melzer, which is medium intensity light system with rail, or landing system with rail, or something like that. And I've been working on them since 2009. And so when I showed up, I noticed that something wasn't right. We are spending inordinate amount of bulbs in order to keep the system technically, or I wouldn't say technically, formally per orders in service for the pilots. And that what that means is that 11 or more bulbs out blown, we are to call it out of service, and pilots or there's supposed to be a NOTAM, notice to, well, it's changed, but it used to be called notice to airmen. And the piloture to know that they're not to use it because there's too many bulbs out. And so I came to this and started working on it and observing it. And I'm asking questions. I'm like, how long have we been changing bulbs? And the older technicians go, well, for many years, all the time. I go, okay. So are we trying to do something to solve this? Because it's not a good situation that we're in on the FAA side. Many of you guys know that incandescent bulbs are outlawed, I guess, and you go to LED for your house, for your business. Well, that's affecting us too. The logistics center in Oklahoma had to specifically go to businesses and say, please keep these going for us until we figure out something else. And so we're not in a plethora of supply, we're in a finite supply. And constantly, every time we go, which is monthly, at least monthly, we check on the lights, see if they're good, see if they're still in service, right? Less than 11. And every single time, the old manager even would message us, Jason, and he'd go, we got this many bulbs out. We're like, we should probably call that out. It just constantly. And so there was one situation where we're like, okay, how can we figure this out, right? Well, we came up with a photocell, and what that does is that it until a certain amount of light hits it, whatever it's in line with doesn't operate. So the lights operate on frequency, the CTAF 122.8, correct? And there's only one frequency in this airfield, and the system gets engaged by the pilot, people engaging the frequency. 3 clicks for low, 5 clicks for medium, 7 clicks for high. And so we're saying, well, what if we put in a photocell that in line with the power, so when they absolutely need it, right, during the nighttime, during inclement weather where the light's low, like fog or heavy rain or snow, and it just wouldn't work, right? Because light bulbs do not like to be on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. And that's what with one frequency for communication, that's what we're seeing happening, is that the mic is getting engaged too many times, too often throughout the day, when the Mauser doesn't need to be used. And so those bulbs are constantly going, I don't like this, I'm done. And so every time we go, we're replacing 11 or more bulbs. Well, not every time, but most of the time.
So do you have a recommendation for us?
Yes, so I just want to clarify one thing. I pursued another option. The photocell didn't work out because you could have fog north and no fog at the airfield. So if a plane's like, where's the runway or where's my lights, they're in the fog going, holy crap. Well, it's not on. He can't engage it because it's nice and sunny right at the lights. Does that make sense? So he can be 10 miles out needing them, and it's not on because, anyway. So the photocell idea kind of went to the wayside. Then I thought, well, why don't we just get another frequency published and in use just for the Mauser system. And the folks...
Can I
go
just
ahead.
interrupt
Yeah.
with one question? So these bulbs cannot be upgraded to an LED given the system that you're using now?
So they are working on that. And there's a proposal, not a proposal, estimated, and please, when I say estimated, that's government time. So you just don't know. 2026. 2026 is when they think they can upgrade or modify the system to use LEDs. Bear in mind, LEDs do not produce enough heat to keep the snow off. So there's a lot of things to work out, right? You go from incandescent that produce a lot of heat, the snow and ice don't accumulate. Now you're going to LED. They have a lot of things to figure out. So yes, there is a modification coming.
Can I ask one more question?
Please, yeah.
You said that the problem we have with the lights currently is that people are using the radio frequency and turning them on and off and on and off and on and off all day long.
Yes.
So.
Well, then I am going to clarify that, but go ahead.
That seems to be something that people aren't doing properly.
That is what I'm going to speak of.
Yeah, okay, in their flight, so they're not supposed to be turning them on, and we wouldn't be having the burnout problem if we didn't have people turning them on and off all the time.
Correct.
Okay.
The problem is, there's so much traffic that every time the mic keys the light, seems like the system thinks that you want to key it up. There's just so much traffic going on, people keying the light. That's what's causing the interference with the lighting system. There's a lot of traffic.
And to be fair, there's a lot of airports that use the same frequency. So Preston, Morgan, Logan, Wendover, Price, all of them using the same frequency.
I don't think they would key.
I had understood that part of the problem was the double click to acknowledge a transmission.
Thank you for not letting me be the one to say it. That is what I need to come to. When you key the mic without audio and you do it in quick succession, that is what is engaging the lights constantly. High, low, low, high, high, high. Or, up, down, up, down, up, down. When you speak into it, it gives enough time that the system, the circuitry goes, okay, there's enough time, I don't need to be engaged between discussions that are normal airport, or what I should say, formal speech by pilots and people on the ground.
So is this something you and the airport manager need to kind of work together, put out a notice to the pilots, those users? I mean,
I came to Bob saying, how do we do this, right? And he suggested I come before you guys. So I'm not the one that said, I need to come before you guys. I was told that that would be the best course in the initial conversation.
Okay.
That what is going on is when someone speaks and the next person right after that person speaks double clicks, triple clicks, Mauser's engaged because it's too quick. And if there's no audio, is my understanding via the circular orders that you guys operate by because you're not air traffic controlled, is that is not the proper use of the frequency.
Okay, so if I can move us ahead.
Yes, please.
For the flight schools that are here, there's a training opportunity for you. Eliminate the double-click acknowledgement.
When people talk over each other and double key, we're in a training environment, happens all the time.
Yep.
I've been on the approach, seen it happen, the lights go on.
Yep.
so how do we fix it? Can you guys have a conversation with the airport manager and the technician and figure out a solution?
With this many people in this environment, it's going to be pretty difficult.
We'll give training. Like I said, I'm not opposed to giving training.
Can we reduce?
I can't fix it because it's going to be individuals, people flying over, trying to find the airport. It's going to be people talking over top of each other. So we can give a training, but it doesn't.
We can reduce the number of times it happens.
But wasn't he saying we should get a different frequency for the lights?
Would it help to go to a different frequency?
So I pursued that, and the people that would approve it and carry that forward denied me.
One of the challenges is it's a safety issue. If you're coming in at night in a foggy day, you don't have time to necessarily go over, hunt up the different frequencies. So they traditionally are the same frequency just so that you have instant access in time to move.
One thing that would help, and Aaron has suggested, is that we go through the process of changing our CTAP frequency.
I heard that's expensive, but by all means, I think that's a perfect fix, because you could leave the Mauser operations under 122.8, and then other communication would be a different frequency.
I have talked to Preston, because Preston needs to be on the same frequency as us, because our approach goes over Preston, and it would have a tendency to maybe have an issue on bad days, for them to be on a different frequency than us. And they have agreed to switch to the same frequency so that everybody's on the same frequency and
Is there a way to tie it to, I mean, you tried the photo cell with technology out there. I mean, I can get my sprinkler system to know when it's dark and when it's light and when it's rainy, and I mean, I can get my sprinkler system to do it. Is there not a way that we can get some sophistication so that it knows when it's dark or when it's stormy? There's no way.
Yeah, well, no, because the pilot needs it miles out, and so there can be a completely different
Weather at that.
weather.
I get that.
So you'd have to put sensors at
But
10
if
miles
some-
out, right? Because you're at approach about 10 miles out, right?
Sure.
So you would need sensors 10 miles out.
Well, I'm not sure we're going to fix it here.
And I wasn't expecting it. I'm just informing you
Right, thank
that
you.
there is a way to reduce or to eliminate. We just need the discussions.
Okay.
And you said it was an expensive fix? Say that?
So to get a different frequency, I heard it's upwards of $1 million.
Oh,
So, because Spectrum Engineering said they alluded to Utah, but they said we're so frequency heavy anyway, as far as trying to keep use of FAA frequencies from other frequencies being used in businesses or whatever else separated, because you need a certain amount of separation between the frequency,
Right.
so you don't have the interruption, right? So they're saying we're already so frequency heavy, they immediately denied me even the opportunity to try.
there's 7 available frequencies that the FAA has right now. We just have to switch them.
And I can give you whoever needs it, I can give you contacts of who to start that conversation with.
I'd make a motion to move this to the manager and have the manager come back with a proposal to
Okay.
have a solution.
No, thank you for letting me speak.
not a worry.
Appreciate it.
And I look forward to further helping, because I want you guys to have the best equipment, available, in good condition all the time.
Thank you.
Because it's important, it's safety, so.
Yep.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. With the mention,
There was
I
a
don't-
motion.
We did have a motion and a second on the floor.
okay, moved and seconded that we refer Mr. Capner to the manager. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Speaking of the manager, tell us what's been going on.
Good morning, everybody. The first thing I have to report on is, so I've got some part-time help out there, and I've had some good help. I've had some good guys out there helping, and unfortunately for me, but to their benefit, a couple of them are moving on. One has got a full-time position at the Air National Guard down in Salt Lake. Him and his wife and new child have now moved on. I've got another who's about to leave. With that being said, we're having some turnover, so an ad should be coming out today looking for new staff, so I will be training and going through that process with my staff. I wanted to report to the board that I attended the UDOT conference last week, went through the airport managers training course. That was helpful, insightful. I got to sit in there with other managers and bounce ideas off them and problem solve with them, as well as the conference itself. We've had one hangar at the airport that's changed hands. A29 was sold. We've got a new lease in place for that. We've got another hangar that is being sold. It's currently up for sale, C4. He's got several offers on that. So a couple things are changing hands as far as hangar ownership. And then our 139 inspection is upcoming. I've had contact with the inspector. He reached out to me to give me the dates. He will be here. He will be in town June 24th, 25th, and 26th to complete that inspection. And that's my update.
Any questions of the manager?
So is this our opportunity, Bob, to, as the mayor indicated, we're making some adjustments potentially to the leases. Those that are changing hands, those are non-assignable, correct? And
Yeah,
so
I've just used the same lease that we've had in place.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want me to hold off on the next one?
Probably need to talk about that.
Have you, so the hangar that was sold, you've already redone that lease?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to put those on hold.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, are you in good shape for the 139 inspection?
Yeah, we're in good shape. We've, there's some things that I'll be spending some time on between now and then as far as making sure that all the paperwork that he's going to want to look at, that I've got it organized for him. But it's in place. I just need to have the confidence that myself that it's all there, that it makes sense to him. So yeah, we're in good shape.
So you've had a list of these are the things he would like to see or she would like to see? And
I don't have a list, but having gone through as a pilot for many, many years, I know what a check ride is for a pilot, and I know when the FAA comes to town, they're pretty predictable. So he's going to look at our operating manual, the one that we have. So the FAA has rules, and so for an airport, we put together a manual that describes to the FAA how we're going to follow those rules. And so our manual has been approved by the FAA, and so they will rely on our manual to determine if we're following the rules. So our manual is basically the checklist. In the manual it says, we'll do this for snow removal, and he'll ask, well, how are you complying with that? And I'll explain, here's how we comply with that. Hey, it says here in your manual that this is the training that you do. How are you doing that training, and where's your documentation? Well, here's the training that we do. Here's the documentation for it. Here's the roster for the training. So that's what's coming. Yeah.
And the fire department will be glad to know that it's going to happen. Because they get inspected too.
And I've reached out to Robert Stevens. He knows when they're coming. He'll be in town for it. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Jeannie, Union Pacific.
Well, I attended virtually both of the meetings that we've had with the ombudsman regarding the lease of land between that sits on Union Pacific land where our fence is. I believe that the ombudsman has been doing a good job at getting the parties there and talking. I'm not certain. They would like to know what we would propose as a lease amount. And John made a proposal at the last meeting, which was promptly countered by a proposal that was, at least 20 times as much, 10 times as much, 10 times as much.
From 750 to 17,000.
Yep. So they believe that the property is worth $45,000 an acre. We would be leasing approximately 3.5 acres. And their lease price per year is $17,000 so far. We asked the question I asked the question would it be possible, since we do not have commercial aircraft at this particular time and we don't have that type of revenue, could we alter the lease to reflect that and then have a codicil in the lease that would say, should we increase our commercial traffic in one way or another, the lease could increase in that regard. I don't know, I didn't leave that meeting knowing what the next step was. And John, you might have a better idea. I get a little frustrated and I want to go, you know, quite frankly, it's like, really? It's a fence. And we have to have the fence so that we can have operations the way they're running at the airport. We can't move the runway. and it's not buildable land. It's not, there's nothing they can do with it. It's just sitting there. And I think that their request for $17,000 a year is a little excessive. But I don't know what else to say about that.
Has there been an appraisal on the land, or did we
They had someone do an appraisal and they based it on, there was land across the road to the south that sold recently for $90,000 an acre. So they said, the appraiser said, well, this land is worth probably half that.
Did we look at what the assessed value is? And do we think they would be willing to consider that?
I don't know that we've looked at the assessed, have you looked at the assessed value?
Oh, they just took the price opinion that.
The price of, pardon?
The price opinion that was provided to them.
Okay.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Do we have
let's come
access
back
to
and
that
know
assessed
what
value?
the assessed value is, say, okay, if you think it's worth that much, we'll raise the assessed value and your taxes will go up.
Well, then our lease, then the amount they want us to pay will go up too.
Jeannie's expressed frustration is shared.
And I don't know what our next steps are.
Jeannie's frustrations are shared. I don't know what the next step is. Yes, we can go back with the counteroffer. Taylor, any thoughts? You attended and.
Yes, so, you know, as far as the counteroffer, I think there's also some issues in the lease. For example, the term says that it's from year to year. I think something that we could push back on as well, if we're going to be paying this much, can we have a longer lease period? That could be one point that we want to offer, because we can look for value in different ways. If we're going to be paying a lot, then we can try and secure what is worth that amount of money. So we can try and increase the lease period, or push back and say, so right now what it says is that not more than once every 3 years, the lessor may redetermine the fixed rent, the maximum. So we could try and push back and say, well, we don't want once every 3 years you redetermine, maybe once every 5, and extend that period that they are redetermining it. Another thing that we can push back on is trying to put in our agreement that the maximum amount they can increase the rent at any one time is a certain percentage, like 5%. Because right now the lease, proposed lease doesn't have any limit there. So they could come back after 3 years and say, well, we want to increase by 50%. So there are different ways that we can push back besides just fighting over that price. But it's difficult to try and push back on price, because ultimately we need this fence to be there. It's going to cost us millions of dollars if we want to try and move it. And we
Why is it
started,
gonna cost millions of dollars for us to move it?
millions of dollars to move the fence.
Yes.
Well, then wouldn't we have to adjust the
Because there-
runway as well?
We have to either adjust the runway, limit our runway capability, or get a whole new study and designation from the FAA.
And that is the runway that gives us the 139 designation, correct?
Yeah, it's our main runway.
Right, the main
It's
runway.
1734.
And the fence is parallel along the entire length of the runway, I assume?
And so
Longer.
where we started, their initial proposal was they wanted $60-some thousand per year. So right now we're at 17 per year at their last.
Well, they reduced the amount of land that they're releasing, so I don't think the lease has really changed at all.
The amount of cash we have to fork over is definitely more attractive. So doing some sort of this hybrid agreement where it's part of the property is not being leased, it's just being licensed.
I mean, we want to deal with them as infrequently as possible.
Correct.
So the longest term we can.
I don't
possibly
understand why we
get.
can't license the entire property, the entire parcel.
Because Union Pacific owns it and they want to extract some profit from it. So,
Is there anything that FAA, I mean, does the FAA ever get involved in this sort of situation?
There's no condemnation.
Generally speaking,
I'm not calling.
The FAA generally does not, they can support acquisition of land, but for this type of negotiation, it really is the federal government coming between two independent entities. The spacing of it is based off actually the Mauser lights that talking about. That's what causes this safety area or the object-free areas in the Part 77 surfaces to be so wide, and why the fence has to be out so far is for those approaches that are supported by those lighting systems that were earlier discussed. So the FAA very much supports anything, but they're not going to come in and take one side or the other, generally
So,
speaking.
do we have to have the fence?
Yeah, so
For wildlife protection, yes,
whether we have 139 status or not, the fence is required. Is that correct? It's not just because of the 139.
The 139 makes it much more required. It's one where ideally they'd like to see fences around all airports, both for safety, keeping wildlife out, and for security. It's exacerbated by being 139. But, I mean, you can have very, very small airports in the middle of nowhere that are surrounded by 10-foot fences because they're surrounded by no houses but lots of deer. So.
Well, I understand that, but to my mind, the situation is not reasonable for the airport and more than reasonable for Union Pacific. And I'm one of
I
those
think it could be worth reaching out to the regional office, the airport district office, and at least potentially getting a letter. If not, they may not go so far as to say we support this or that, but a letter of explanation from the FAA side. Generally speaking, they're very hesitant to go out and say, we fully support this or fully support that.
Well, the interesting part about it is if they require the fence and the fence is on Union Pacific property, Union Pacific cannot develop that property into anything else.
Correct. Actually, for several reasons. One, Logan actually has the Logan Airport and the city and the overlay zone explicitly calls out in the zoning ordinance that any development is subject to the airport master plan.
So I have explained that at length to Union Pacific, that there's multiple reasons this property can't be developed. Union Pacific agrees, they don't want to develop it, they want to keep it as a transportation corridor. So we're not talking about whether or not they want to build something, they understand, and they understand why they can't build anything on it. So I don't think that's a concern with Union Pacific.
Okay.
Perhaps
But it is their property, and they could tear out the fence. That's not developing. it.
they could require us to tear out the fence.
Yes, they
based
can
on-
require us to tear out the fence if the lease ends. That's not developing it, that's just them asserting their property right
Yeah.
on that property.
Perhaps the thing we need to do is develop a response, check the assessed value, itemize the items in the lease that Taylor is uncomfortable with, and keep the dialogue going by giving them an alternate proposal.
That's the only way we can keep the dialogue going.
Of which they can certainly say no, but. they can-
Correct. But I'm not optimistic that they're going to agree to $750 a year ever again.
No.
So let's just dispel that. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
But I
looking
also think-
realistically at this, I think that we need to think a lot higher than $750 per year.
I also think that their valuation is way overvalued.
We provided them with that $45,000 an acre figure.
We did?
We did.
That parcel of land was purchased with an FAA grant 3 years ago, I believe.
What parcel?
The one that they were doing a comparison of, that was roughly the 90,000 an acre. But it was in a different location relative to the airport, south of the runway.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we provide it with value, we don't have much to argue about.
Is there a, and I don't know whether we've looked at it, but is there a chance to purchase an easement across it, not own it, they can still own it, but have a one-time purchase now, and then not have to have a continuous lease that we go back and back and back for? Is that ever, and I don't even know if it's an option, so I just toss it, so.
Given our dealings with the railroad, granted it's on roads, not airports, but I would be doubtful of
Okay,
that.
that's fine.
They're just,
They don't sell.
That was brought up as an option, to possibly execute a lease or an easement just for the fence. But they were hesitant to do that because they said, I'm not sure how much weight this carries with me, but they said, well, in the future, if we wanted to increase our railroad operations and maybe put a side spur track, that easement could interfere with those operations. So
and last year, they actually did finally invest a significant amount into upgrading the infrastructure through this valley.
But if they do a spur, that interferes with the airport.
not necessarily, because the only permanent structure would be a rail that's this tall. So, if it's a movable.
But
car-
they are saying that us having an easement as wide as the fence prevents them from doing that.
Yeah, for me.
And that doesn't make any sense, because that says, well, if we put in a spur, the fence is gonna be in the way. And if the fence is in the way, then they will take down the fence. And if they take down the fence, then we've got the same problem we already have.
That is the ongoing risk.
So I don't understand the argument that that if we would request an easement, that is only the width of the fence.
But we can request all we want, that they own the property and,
Right.
again,
We
Well,
can't
I know
force-
that.
we
they're
can't
not
force
publicly minded. I mean, they're,
John and Jeannie, are the negotiations, we call them negotiations, are they truly negotiations? If they haven't changed the lease rate, they've acquiesced to the space, the amount of acreage, but they haven't acquiesced at all to the lease rate. Is that what I'm understanding?
Pretty much no, because before it was 9 acres? And now it's 3? Wasn't the original,
It was 9.1, I think.
9.1
so if you
and
say
3.8.
17 for 3, it's pretty much 60,000.
What was 9 acres?
The original lease proposal.
We wanted more than what's
No,
there?
no.
they were charging us more than we needed.
Yeah, they were charging us for the entire
Oh,
space.
They were proposing to lease that entire
Yes,
area.
and that was the 60,000, so they really haven't come down at all.
So it seems to me, we're obviously not gonna solve it here either. You bring put things on the agenda that we can't solve, John. But you look at this, it's not going away. And I've got confidence in you guys as you continue to fire back up those meetings. We've just got to be able to negotiate it. I don't disagree with what Taylor's saying as far as the rate. We're not going to get $750, but there's very little value in that land.
Very little value.
Well, John made
There's as much value as we place in that land.
That's exactly
And that property, if we can't run the airport without that property, to us, the willing buyer, there's a lot of value. And Union Pacific understands that, which is why they feel they can charge a high rate, because they know we must have this property. That's extortion.
No, I hear what you're
Yeah,
saying.
the railroad's really good at that.
But see, I don't know, if we were to remove the fence because Union Pacific isn't cooperative, what does the FAA say?
We'll have to ask that.
I mean, I would ask that question because it's like, I'd just as soon walk away from them.
Yeah. Jeannie, I'm not indifferent with you. I've been sitting here thinking, I would just say, forget the lease.
Yeah, me too.
But then John brought up the point, they'll make us remove it. So there's some cost there.
I don't know whether it's on their property. They can,
Our lease,
But what I heard is you can't operate the airport without that
That's
fence.
a big deal.
And
That's
again,
where
there's multiple different ways to approach any particular problem. I mean, I'm just literally spitballing here, so I don't even know if it's possible, but drive across at crossings through gates, there's cattle guards. Could you make a cattle guard wide enough that deer can't jump over? They can jump over your normal driveway cattle guard, but in theory, what if something were 20 feet wide? I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a problem worth, but it might, in theory, work. I don't know if it's ever been tried before. Doesn't mean we can't try to solve just because a problem hasn't been solved before, doesn't mean it can't be solved. So we can kind of
I think
we can start going down, we really haven't explored any of those options because
The reason why the ground needs to be flat near the runway on our property, can we dig down so that we have the fence there?
I mean, that's a definite possibility. It's one, because what we're talking about, the interaction is Part 77 surfaces. Runways are designed for planes to take off and land. Airports are designed for them to safely be in the airspace around them. Runway's always the tallest point and things go away from it. This Part 77 surface is flat at the runway and goes out, and then it goes up kind of like like a big bowl. So you want to protect this air that the planes could be coming in. So, I mean, that, again, we haven't explored that, but. How far is our property line from the fence? Believe it's 33 feet from center of track.
And how far is it from the
No, it's
fence?
not.
Oh,
They
I'm
said
sorry.
200 or 100.
Well, that was the issue, that was a different issue regarding what their records say versus what was recorded deeds. But that was actually only also on the southern third of the airport.
I'm
but
looking at the aerial and it looks like it's 10 feet or
I think it's 18.
18 feet.
It's either, of that 33 feet, I can't remember if it's 18 feet from property line or 18 feet from center of track. So it's right about half of that distance regardless.
How far is it from fence to center of runway?
Right now?
550.
Yeah, so
Give or
is
take.
there any chance the FAA would give us a variance of 18?
Not, the big issue is with that instrument landing system. It's in order to have the very low minimum, so coming in that bad weather, that's where, yes, it could come closer, they would be a variance, but
Could you do this?
by like dropping down, cutting,
But have the fence be a different height wherever it would interfere with that system, and then have it go higher as you go down the runway?
it's the duration, that surface runs parallel to the length of the runway. So the entire fence would have to be adjusted.
Do we know how many use that strict of an approach? I mean, the school, I don't know whether the school's using that strict of an approach, if that is only the USU charter flight, or, I'm just kind of curious,
Right, the corporate
I don't
jets use the
use that,
instrument.
I don't use that in that level of detail.
The way the FAA looks at it is just, here is the approach, here are the approach minimums that are offered. Minimums being, for very low weather, you want to have low minimums, which means the clouds can be very close to the ground and the visibility can be very poor, such as heavy fog.
But if that's for 10 flights in a year, that's different than if it's 1,000 flights in a year or 10,000 flights a year. I think it would be interesting if we could find out how many, if that's possible through our vector or the other software that we're using for approaches. Is it possible to see that kind of approach? Is that even
We
possible
can
data?
see how many flights, the only data that would be out there would be number of flights that had an instrument, a filed plan with destination of the airport. And whatever that number is, the number of users will be higher because it's very possible where someone could be flying from, say, St. Louis to Logan, and they filed an IFR flight plan. They canceled their IFR when they were getting close. They might still trigger the lights, they might run it in the background, but it's not they have not filed IFR to the ground, so that wouldn't be recorded. If students are running missed approach on an RNAV GPS, that's not going to be recorded. That's why they set these minimums and set the approach with those minimums. It's saying if the weather is this bad or better, you can fly in there. If it's worse, you cannot, based off of the approach.
There are levels of that approach, and not every airport has the same detailed level of approach. It might be interesting to see if this allows us to do the more detailed approach. I don't know what the ceiling of this approach is.
Can you look that up, Connor?
At that point, if it's a 100-foot ceiling for this approach and a 500-foot ceiling for the next level, and it solves our problem, it'd be interesting to know what other options we may have. I guess that's the question, and how valuable really is it?
I would say moving forward, I would like to see if we could ask the FAA if we could do the 18-foot change and sort of figure out how much that might cost us. I would like to put a proposal together to Union Pacific based on the assessed value, not on our opinion, and include the minimal percentage increases in cost that have been recommended, and see where that flies, and then come back, and that's all we can do. But I would like to ask the FAA if there are any options that we have available to us to move the fence.
As a parallel.
Yeah.
Did you say we need 500 feet from the center of the runway?
That's where the start of that 7-to-1. So from center of runway, go out 500 feet, and then it starts climbing at a 7-to-1 ratio. That's the area that needs to be cleared.
500 feet that it's just at ground level.
Mhm.
And then after 500 feet, it can start going up.
Goes up at a 7-to-1 slope. And that 7-to-1 slope.
So after 7 feet, it could be 1 foot high?
Correct. And that's why that particular fence is 6 feet tall, and the remainder of your perimeter fence is 8 feet tall. Because they already lowered it down. The FAA bought off on lowering that fence down at construction, making it 6 foot instead of 8 foot in order to clear that 7-to-1 slope.
Because it's about 540 feet or so, 535 feet out?
Yes.
I seem to recall that one time you gave a rough estimate of moving the fence would be in excess of $1 million.
It'd be and I remember that it was a very much back of the napkin cost estimate, but ongoing cost of fences right now, it was, I want to say, roughly $1 million.
What sort of shape is the fence in? I mean, is it Okay.
It's in good shape.
Yeah.
And that would be just for the installation of a new fence in a comparable location.
And then
But that's a new
with
fence.
removal.
And-
Correct,
Not using the old fence.
correct.
And removing the old one
Removing the old one.
is
It,
in addition to that.
Well, what if we removed the old one and moved it?
That you're still gonna have the cost of both.
it's one, where that cost benefit comes into play is construction duration time. They can remove it in a day or two. They just go out there with equipment and rip out stuff and put it in a ball. If you're talking about trying to save that material, then you're basically having to unbuild the fence. So you're building it twice, basically. You're unbuilding it once and then building it a second time with that material. So
And our lease states today that we would have to remove it?
Yes,
That's the lease we're currently under, that's correct.
We're not in a lease right now.
we're still obligated under that original lease.
Okay, thank you.
Are they talking about retroactive, this, taking
Yes.
this rate retroactive?
Yes, they indicate a lump sum payment starting to cover the period from when the other lease ended to when we initiate the new one.
Which is 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
So, okay, is that a motion?
Yeah,
Authorize us to go
sure.
ahead. Is there a second?
I think it was fair to ask, it was to go back negotiation, if you want to read back the motion.
I'll restate it.
Okay.
Closely. She said that basically that we, in parallel, approach the FAA to continue to explore other options while we go back to Union Pacific with a proposal at the assessed value with the changes to the lease that Taylor has earmarked. Is that close enough?
Uh-huh, with the set percentages or a limit on percent raise.
A cap on percentage increase.
Yeah, and a five-year instead of a 3-year.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Did you, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, did the board determine a counteroffer price?
Assessed valuation.
Assessed valuation, how is that going to translate into a year?
They have a percent, they talked about using a percentage of the value in that meeting, and I don't remember exactly how they stated it, but that's how they calculated their rent.
I'll take a look at the minutes.
Using that 45,000.
Yeah.
Is 12%.
Okay,
Just a little over 12% is what they're using of value
right.
for an annual rate.
My only
Is
question on that
that
was if
out of
that's what we're,
line?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is that out of line? I mean,
Seems a little high.
My only question is we would be making a motion for, do we want to have any kind of caveat on when we go back to find out that assessed value? I just don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
just don't know
think-
what that is, so.
Well, I've just said we could move forward with that,
In mind.
using those two paths and go back to the ombudsman and work at it some more.
why don't we have Taylor communicate that assessed value to our current executive committee that's working on some of the issues? I mean, if it's a ridiculously low amount, I think we, you know, it may just
Maybe we
hurt
don't
us
even need
with
a
the
motion.
rest.
just
Or
to-
if it's higher than what we already have, then that would be counterproductive. But I think it's a good idea to look at for sure.
Yeah, so if we could check it and maybe run it by John, Carl, and Brett, again, that, just by email, that would not be a public meeting, because it's a,
Sure. So I know the board wants the lowest possible, the ideal lease amount would be $0. I understand that, but is there a realistic number that we could go back with that, you know, because when you do a negotiation, in any sort of negotiation, you have your top that's, you absolutely can't go beyond, and your floor. I think we have our floor that we're willing to do 0, but Union Pacific has their floor. I'm not exactly sure what that floor is. But it's worth testing the waters to see. I think
Well,
their floor
obviously-
is definitely above $750 per year.
Right.
I'm sure their floor is above that, but if we don't try and test that, then.
Well, I just really think we need to make some of these other steps as well. Sitting here and spitballing and saying, well, we could pay it $2,000 a month, a year, or whatever, is not productive based on any kind of data or any, we would have to say, using your 12% of assessed value, we would be willing to pay X if the assessed value is $22,000 or whatever. But, it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, this is what we would like to offer. We offered $750, which was just out of hand discarded. So we know that it has to be more than that. We also know that 16,000 is too much for us. So we're somewhere in between, but I don't know where that is yet.
Sure.
The Union Pacific has used a negotiating ploy which works to our benefit as well. And everything they've offered, they said, well, this is subject to Omaha's approval. We've been authorized to negotiate, but it's subject to final approval. Taylor can go back exactly the same way. Well, what if? And give the price. And oh, by the way, this is subject to final approval by the board. And so any negotiations does not have to be, we do not have to be committed to it. Because they're not committed on anything that they have told us. There's always the caveat that.
Well, they're committed to the 16, 17.
He always says, all of this is subject to approval by my boss.
Also, I think it would be worthwhile if the board would talk to the manager and figure out what exactly you can afford. So if there's a proposal, we can say, absolutely not, that doesn't work, that won't fit in our budget. If it's, taking a look at the revenues for a year and figuring out what, even if you have to break it out monthly, what the board feels like it could afford.
Something you can do.
So that way we can know with absolute certainty what our ceiling is and what we're not willing to go beyond.
Yeah, Bob and I can talk about that and look at the budget and see if there's something we can live with.
Right.
Okay.
And as far as the assessed value, this is a railroad, so the county doesn't assess the value. It's centrally assessed, so the state assesses the value.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll have to reach out to the state to get that number, and hopefully that's not too difficult.
And you'll do that also?
Yeah, it might be difficult though, because they don't assess it parcel by parcel for the railroads. It's an overall number. So I don't know. It could be difficult. I'll look into that a little bit more.
Okay. All right. We have a motion and a second that we continue to formulate a response to Union Pacific. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Moving quickly on, Judd. What have we got on our plate for the next little while?
Okay, I will go very quickly. John asked me to describe, briefly bring up the upcoming capital improvement projects. You've seen this before several times. This is a screenshot of the state system for upcoming capital improvement projects going out through 2030 here. But coming up this year, being this calendar year, FY25 at the state level, is the reconstruction. So these columns are title, calendar year, approximate value, and fiscal year. The reconstruction of Taxiway Charlie and more specifically associated with the upcoming 139 inspection, the state is able to find money to help with painting the runway and taxiway. That was one of the discrepancies made last year, and so the plan is in place. These funds would be coming available in July at the start of the next fiscal year. Then just the future projects being snow removal, taxiway India, pavement preservation, SRE is snow removal equipment building, and then looking at taxiway Bravo, the replacement signs, it's out of order, but it kind of came in last minute, so that project has actually been completed. So very quickly, that's the upcoming projects, just to refresh what these different projects are. This is the pavement, or excuse me, the painting, broken down into the runway, taxiway Bravo, Delta, and Alpha. So runway you can definitely see. Taxiway Alpha is the small connector on the far left or the south. And Delta is that diagonal. Bravo is the parallel. Estimated cost, so with, and then some areas of concern are what these red lines correspond to. But the paint would address them all. These are the cost estimates that came up with when working with the state to see if they could make the money happen this coming year. So broken down into the runway, taxiway Bravo, and, excuse me. Long story short, about $150,000 project. The state is supportive of that. Obviously, the Transportation Commission has not had their final budget. That will be later this month, but there's been, when this has been brought to them in preliminary meetings, they have been supportive of it, so anticipate this funding coming available next month. This would be a project we would design quickly and then get it done this summer. Next one would be Taxiway Charlie. This is the parallel taxiway of the Crosswind runway. You can see it actually does stop here. It was rebuilt to this northern section. Just going to flip back to a previous version. Main runway, Crosswind runway. About where this picture ends is about how far out that Charlie had been redone in the past. It is in failing condition. There are parts of it that literally look like a gravel road. So the purpose of this project is to mill that and repave it in place. It would be a design this year with construction next spring. Any questions on those two upcoming projects? And then this is, again, estimated cost, breaking that down to roughly $750, $775. Kind of know more once we can dig in there and do some designing, but on preliminary estimates for that.
Great.
And then otherwise, we just have two, if you recall last meeting talking about getting the scheduling for a signage project, that signage, replacing the signs, that was all completed ahead of schedule. And we're just wrapping up the final reports for that now. And then the master plan had a very productive TAC meeting, basically stepping through all the different steps of the master plan. We're down now into incorporating the input from the TAC regarding the layout plans and working up the financials associated with that. And that's what we'll be working on for the next couple of, probably a month or two at least.
Any questions of?
Judd, real quick, on those projects, the painting and Taxiway Charlie, are both of those funded heavily by FAA, 90%, and then we've got to come up with the balance?
With both of those projects, that is the state of Utah stepping up.
Doing it all?
Doing it all. Well, there's no federal funding on these.
Okay.
hopefully in the future with stuff like Charlie, that could be hopefully federally eligible. That's one of the big things coming out of the master plan is how busy you are. That the need for a crosswind runway or a second runway, need for a control tower, which actually deal with some of those Mauser and communication issues. But as of now, the parallel taxiway for the crosswind is not federally eligible. So the state is looking to support that as well as the paint project. The paint is eligible, but in order to expedite it, we're still, the federal year started October 1st of last year and they still haven't figured out funding yet. The state recognized the problem earlier this year after working with Bob and all right, we'll step up and do it now. So that's why, even though the paint is eligible for federal, the state's willing to step up and do it now to help maintain the 139.
So if it's 150,000 that you were just showing, they'll fund the whole amount?
90-10.
90-10.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Working committee, Brett Yuki, please.
Just real briefly, Chairman, we're a little bit over schedule, and so I'll make this real brief. Just as we're aware, we've got the report, and as we've met to go through some of those immediate things that can be addressed, the recommendation is we've looked at those, they need to have further help and assistance. And so the proposal or the request would be, could we get 3 additional members that could take on some of those areas that that Dr. Jones identified and have them look at those and come back to council with a recommendation. Is that a reasonable request?
Are you saying a separate 3-member committee?
Correct, yeah. And the reason for that is the issues that have been identified are going to take some working through. And there's a lot of constituents, and we just need to say, which of these items that are recommended by Dr. Jones are realistic and which ones are not. And in order to do that, we just need people to have the ability to go meet with those people that are most affected. And some of it, Mayor, goes back to those leases. We just need a committee, a working committee that could look at those and say, what's realistic, what's not.
Did the committee determine which subject areas you want the other committee to take care of?
Yeah.
What are those?
Yeah.
Can you share those? Or, I mean,
Yeah.
Because that might determine which people have the best expertise to.
Yeah, the main thing was the leases and addressing that, landing fees. Those are the 2 areas that, and then the committee is going to continue to look at some of the other areas that Dr. Jones referred to.
So you want this other committee to look at leases and landing fees?
Leases and landing fees, that's correct. Carl and John, is there anything else? I mean, those are the main things that I had in mind.
Yeah, those are the main things.
And
And we may even want to split those and have one work group on leases and one on landing fees.
what about sort of conversations with the university? I mean,
That's the one we're going to take that one.
okay.
And remind us who is on the current committee?
Carl, Brett, and I.
Because if you want to put one member of that group over onto Lisa, I mean, again, if you think I can be helpful with the university, we might shift our groups a little just on that portion.
And
Bob would work with all of the working groups.
what's hard is they are moving quicker on the leases than anything.
Yeah, so we need to get that
We
addressed.
need to get that.
I would love to have John involved in that lease discussion because of his real estate expertise, in addition to being the chair and all of his experience with this board. I would be willing to help with that other committee as well.
On leases.
Yeah, the lease and landing fee committee.
The lease and landing fee.
That'd be great, and I don't,
And you know,
that's
any of
not a
us
great
are
area
help.
for me.
I believe any of us are willing to help. So you know, if you can, John, if you guys can decide who you think would be the most valuable and the most helpful getting whatever you need done, then
Yeah,
just
if you want to give an assignment to like Jeannie and I or something.
whatever you
or-
want to do.
Sounds great. let us come back. We'll contact you directly.
Okay.
I appreciate your willingness to
Thank
do
you.
that.
Yep,
That'll
absolutely.
be efficient and effective to get
I
it
think
done.
Ryan would be helpful in that committee as well.
I'm happy to help in
has
any
a lot of
pieces
experience
of those
with
And then
leases.
again,
Uh,
you've got Taylor from the county to,
Yeah.
Well, Taylor's really not a committee member, is he?
no, I'm just saying, if
Might
they're
be nice to have him
negotiating
there.
leases, they would need some legal advice. And
He's a
again,
Just like poor Taylor, he keeps saying it's out of his pay grade, so.
I think it would be interesting to see what is low-hanging fruit out of the list of recommendations and what are detail ones. If there are things that in there, some low-hanging fruit recommendations that we can say, hey, you know what, these may make sense and we could implement a few that are good ones, or if everything is going to be a 6 to 9 month or whatever the process is, it might be nice to identify which of those we think are valuable and which ones we frankly just don't agree with.
Well, I think they're trying to sort through that right now. Yeah.
You're spot on.
Yep.
I would love it if we could have a conversation about the report in this forum here. It's a public airport. This report was paid for with public dollars. I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of valuable information in here, and like Ryan said, we may not agree with all of it, but I think it's important for us to have a public discussion about this as soon as we think is appropriate. And I just feel uncomfortable that we have this report and we're holding on to it, and I feel like the pilots, the public would be interested in hearing a presentation about the report and what's being recommended, knowing that this is an outside consultant who might have some creative ideas that might not work for us. But I think at the same time, there are a lot of really interesting proposals in here. And I know we want to look at all of these, and there's a lot of information, a lot of work that would need to be done, but I feel like it would be appropriate for us to have some kind of a presentation to this body about the report and what's in it and what the recommendations are. And I don't know if that's Dr. Jones that we have come give that report, or if we have the committee do it, or if we have Bob do it. But I think we have an obligation to the public and to the pilots to say, we did a study and here it is, and let people look at it. Even if I feel there are some things that make me uncomfortable about the report, and I don't know, maybe the directness of some of the information, or the approach, the style, but I think that's okay, because we didn't write it, an outside consultant wrote it. But I just
From an
really
outside
feel like we need to
perspective that
talk
we may or may
about
not agree with on some of those things, but I agree with you. I agree, if I weren't on the board, I would be interested in it, and would understand and say, hey, okay, these are the problems that some third party identified. I promise you, I will have been able to, as a pilot or user of the airport, there's some that I'm well aware of that are not surprises. And some that the public may say, oh, as long as that is made clear that this is a third-party outside perspective, not a review of the board itself, but we're looking at what the pluses and minuses are of weaknesses. And as smart as the rest of you are, I'm learning to become as smart, and I hope to be as smart as you guys are, but we have a lot of smart ones here that might help answer some of those questions as well. I think that there's a lot of people interested in the airport to make it its best.
And I'm not saying that the committee approach is a bad approach. I think that's a really good approach, actually, because there's a lot of work that I think will come out of this report, and we need to start working on it. And I think the committee approach is probably the most efficient way to do that. At the same time, I think the public deserves to know what we're working on, what these ideas are, what this report is that was paid for, and even if it's uncomfortable, we need to have that discussion publicly.
And the goal would, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, the goal would be work as quick as we can in these committees come back with, this is what's been recommended, these are possible solutions and options, instead of just saying, here are the recommendations. That can go so many different directions, and it can almost be counteractive. And
Very counterproductive.
Everyone could have their own opinion. And so the goal would be, we'll work with the university, let's get close with them, understand what works, what doesn't work, what's really viable. But I'm absolutely fine with the report. I don't think there's anything in there that people would say, wow, I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, there was one thing in there that I hadn't thought of, but yeah, for the most part, it's things we already know are issues.
Correct, yeah.
But I think it's, it does behoove us to do what we can to create a solution-based environment from the board perspective and share the report and some solutions at the same time, and how we've begun to prioritize the questions that were raised.
And they may not be the only solutions, to Ryan's point.
Right.
Others may have, and I would hope that through the committees that we can get those people involved and get some input, so we know we've got a good direction.
What do we do with other reports like this with county or the airport? Can we put a spot, maybe at Janine's desk or somewhere that they can be reviewed or looked at, rather than publishing on the website with no content of that? Is there I don't know what the method is that you're proposing there, David. Are you thinking, mail it out? You're thinking putting a copy that can be checked out?
We certainly don't have the money to mail it out.
Right. I mean, but that's what I'm just trying to figure out what that potential solution looks like. What are you thinking, David?
I was assuming all along that when this report got completed, that we would have a presentation to the board here, that there would be a presentation in this meeting and a PowerPoint. Dr. Jones came and met with me, and he showed me a PowerPoint and gave me a PowerPoint presentation about a summary of his recommendations. And I think something like that, I don't think him doing that was included in the original cost or scope. He's willing to do it. It would cost us a little bit more, but we could have our airport manager do that even.
So are you asking for a presentation from him to be on the agenda?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that in this meeting on our agenda, that we would just have a summary of the findings presented, a report. But
I mean, we could have him zoom in. I mean,
yeah, that's
Dr.
true.
Jones, so
Yeah.
it wasn't
Yeah.
expensive.
But we can check with him to see what his schedule is, so as early as July or our August meeting.
And we may even want to schedule a special meeting, because if we have other business to take care of on our July agenda, that presentation might take a while.
Might take an hour.
Yeah, I feel like it should be an hour-long presentation.
So are you asking for a motion to put on the agenda? I guess I'm not sure what action you're looking for.
Or are you just making a comment?
Yeah, I would like it to be on the agenda at some point, and I don't know
I'll
if it's...
second your motion. I assume that that's a motion, and I'll second your motion that it's...
Okay. That we put it on the
Put it on the
agenda.
agenda
And
for a presentation for...
as far as the date, I'm okay with the chair, figuring out when that's most appropriate, and working with Dr. Jones on if it's on our normal meeting schedule or some workshop in between.
Well, let me just comment. The reason we decided to put together this working committee is because we were concerned about putting out this whole report prematurely without us having an opportunity to decide what really will benefit our situation versus an outside consultant's view of these things. And so I'm still hesitant in making this report public. It isn't, I don't see that we're gaining anything except maybe an opportunity for unneeded concerns to be brought forward in people's minds. And that's my concern. There is a lot of stuff in that report, and a lot of it I don't think applies really to our situation at all. And that's why we put together these this working committee to try and boil this thing down to a more appropriate and applicable determination as to what really applies to our situation in Logan City and Cache County. Right, and so I'm hesitant in just bringing this thing out open to the public, because I really think there's things in there that people are going to be concerned about, and not necessarily so, until we've had a chance to really.
My concern with that one is that then it may view the report as a committee or a board report now. It is truly independent and third party from their perspective. He could publish it. I mean, somebody could come along and publish this report on their own site, and I mean, we don't have no control over what the public reports or does. I think the sooner we have, vetting of that, and that the more we take it in and maybe caveat or change, we start to adopt that rather than truly frame it of what it is. And it is truly a outside third party look from an outsider, and we should be able to look at ourselves and say, hey, anybody can come up. We'll take comment from anybody from the public and say, hey, they may or may not be right, but we're open for opportunity to self-evaluate if we're doing great. If we're not, I think we can improve or not. And I think that's what this is. This is an opportunity for us to say, is it something we can improve? Is it not? And I would like to see it open. If I were just a user and not on the board, I'd certainly be interested in reading it. So that's where I'm at.
And there is some merit to, having more heads to solve the problems, or the issues. Again, we can't kind of do everything at once, and I think is our concern with the report. This is, there are a lot of recommendations, and we need to prioritize, decide what's important to us.
We can only get to 2 or 3.
Right, and
Yeah.
Financially, what can we do in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? So, Brett, any thoughts on that? Do we,
Well, I just say we continue to move forward with getting another committee, get that going, and then John can contact Dr. Jones and get something based on his availability. I'm absolutely fine with having, I do agree it needs to be a separate meeting from this.
And it could be concurrent. It doesn't need to stop one set of route to evaluate. It just.
Well, and some months we end up canceling Airport Authority because there's not much on the agenda. We all kind of have this set time reserved, so maybe we just say, whether it's July or August or wherever, it's like, that's all we're doing, and anything else gets pushed to the next, any agenda items on a typical agenda is just the next month.
Or if it's just a couple of quick items, maybe we do it all together.
Yeah. Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we schedule a time with Dr. Jones when he can present his report to us at a public meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Just a comment, as I was reading through the report, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but say, that's something that the Herald Journal will key on. And that's a fact of life.
I know, and at some point you put it out there, and we'll have to say, we disagree with this, or we're going to work on this. And again, it's just so much material, and we haven't really decided how to divide it out and address it yet. But we can get other people's.
Okay. We've got a 4. All against indicate.
Nay.
Okay. Andreas, you're up.
Thank you. I'll keep this short, and it's great news, and I hope that we all can get excited about this future prospect. The Division of Aeronautics has selected Utah State University to host next year's aeronautical conference. It'll be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the 25th through 27th of June, 2025. So Wednesday will be the setup, the career fair, a little bit of an opportunity for jobs and interest. The exhibit hall will be set up, and Thursday and Friday, in addition to the traditional last 3 years in terms of seminars, we're going to add hands-on workshops. So our 737 room is under construction. We'll have a 737 simulator open. EAA is committed to bringing in some projects, so we'll have some hands-on workshops. If you want to come pop some rivets, do some electrical wiring on an actual aircraft, under supervision of a mechanic, you can do that. Our drone lab will be open, composites lab. We are going to really make this an interactive activity. Then what we'd like to propose is to have an airport open house on Saturday the 28th. This will be not part of the conference, but in conjunction with. And so that is my proposal to get approval to form a committee as part of Cache Valley Aviation Association to help us come up with an airport open house. It's been a decade since we've had one. The idea would be static displays will be the emphasis. Of course, I've already texted Brad Worston and Barry Hancock for some invitations for some aerial demonstrations. We'll reach out to the community, and we'll have a STEM fair to bring a lot of the high school and youth together, but to make it an event that we haven't had in 10 years. That'll be Saturday the 28th. Bill, go ahead.
Do you anticipate that all of those riveting and composite will also be available during the open house?
So that's what we're trying to figure out. We'd like to bring some stuff out to the airport on that Saturday. That is correct. EAA has already talked about it. We want to do some FAA workshops. I've invited the FAA to bring their altitude chamber out, the portable one. So we'll see what we can get. And so I'll love to form the committee, look for volunteers to be on it, to be able to make this. Obviously, would work with the Airport Authority Board, the airport manager, and our primary operators, Utah State Leading Edge. But we want to make sure that we can put something together. We haven't had one in 10 years. I think it'd be a great opportunity to bring some excitement to the airport and visibility. We had over 500 people at this year's conference. So I've worked with Sean Milne, and he's already put the notice out to the hotels in town. We're gonna put this on the map. There's nothing else that weekend right now, so we think it's gonna be a good weekend. Advertise the Cache Cruise In. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do to synergize with other events in the valley.
Okay. Is there a motion to authorize the formation of a committee for an open house on the 28th in our support of the Aeronautics Conference?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we authorize the committee to be formed to have an open house on the 28th of June, 2025, in connection with the Aeronautic Conference. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any other business? Let's adjourn.
What's these going for you?